So I've been using the iPhone 16 Pro as my daily driver for the last month or so, and there's a few things that have changed since my initial review. So what other better way to show you guys what's changed than to show you how I use it in my day-to-day life? Welcome to another day in the life with me and the iPhone 16 Pro 1 month later. When I first got the iPhone 16 Pro, the new features didn't seem very impressive at the time. There was the 48 megapixel ultra-wide, the 5x optical zoom, the camera control button, and the slightly bigger display. But over time, these features have proved to be a lot more beneficial than I initially thought. Let's talk about them. So let's talk about that display on the iPhone 16 Pro, which went up from 6.1 inches to 6.3 inches. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but in terms of the actual display and the size of the Pro series, it does make this a lot more attractive to more people, especially when a lot of other competitors have been going for the 6.3-inch form factor, which I think is basically the perfect size for most people. Now obviously the Pro Max is there for those who need that bigger size, but I believe that the 6.3-inch display size is the perfect sweet spot. And because the bezels are a lot more thinner, the actual dimension of the phone isn't that much bigger, which is great to see. So the display is what you see, but what does the phone see? Let's talk about the cameras a bit more. Now starting off with that ultra-wide 48 megapixel sensor, well, actually, the changes aren't as important as I thought they were. Now, I initially thought that this was going to be a pretty big deal for the ultra-wide sensor, but there's a couple of things that do set it back a little bit. Now, the main thing for me is that unlike the main 48 megapixel sensor, the ultra-wide doesn't actually bend down to 24 megapixel photos. So what the main sensor does is that even though it doesn't shoot at 48 megapixels all the time, you can actually default it to 24 megapixels, and it will basically use lossless compression to make the size a lot more smaller, but also retain that high image quality and resolution. The ultra-wide camera, which is also 48 megapixels, does not do that, and it continuously shoots at 12 megapixels by default. What this means is that in reality, even though the resolution is a lot more higher, you're not going to be able to see that difference in day-to-day usage because you won't be able to get that high resolution unless you're shooting at 48 megapixels. Unlike the main sensor, which does bend down to 24 megapixels, to give you the best of both worlds. So in that sense, the ultra-wide camera is a little less than underwhelming. But don't get me wrong, this is still a great camera. And the fact that it is 48 megapixels is great because a lot of competitors are already at 50 megapixels anyway. But what is important is the 5x optical zoom. Now yes, this came from the 15 Pro Max, and in some ways, some people might say that the 3x optical zoom is a bit more appropriate for this phone, but I actually found that the 5x optical zoom to be very useful in a lot of different scenarios. Whether you're taking portraits or just trying to zoom a lot more further, the 5x optical zoom has a lot more versatility, and I was finding that I was using it a lot more than I typically do. It actually is very useful in a lot of different situations, and because it is the equivalent focal length of 120mm, it gives you that really nice compression between the foreground and the background, and paired with the portrait mode, it does give some really stunning photos. So the 5x optical zoom is definitely one of the bigger changes that I have found to be very useful on the Pro series. Now if you do have a 15 Pro Max, then this probably won't be a big news to you, but if you were looking at getting the 16 Pro, then this is something to keep an eye out for. And finally, the last change, the camera control button, which is pretty much the biggest physical difference between the 15 Pro and the 16 Pro. Now, when I first tested out the camera control button, at first I felt that it was a very weird decision for Apple to make. In many ways, it doesn't make a lot of sense, and to this day, I still feel very mixed about this button. Now, on one hand, it's very useful for launching the camera app very quickly. Whenever I will feel like taking a photo, I can literally just click this button twice, I'm into the camera app. The issue is that when I try to use it as a camera shutter button, it isn't very good at taking photos. Because when you're trying to use it with one hand, it's not in the ideal position for horizontal and vertical, and you end up trying to reach with your finger for the camera control button, and that also makes your hand a little bit unsteady, making the phone shake when you're taking that photo. So I rarely use the camera shutter unless I'm using two hands. On the other hand, there's quite a lot of functions that you can do with this button, but I don't think it's very useful. And what's also really annoying is that sometimes when I'm trying to use the camera shutter, I end up activating different functions on the camera app, which just makes everything a bit more messier. So even though I have been using the camera control button a lot more frequently, I still feel like this is a very weird button, and the placement really does limit its versatility, and the functionality isn't quite there yet unless you are really into trying to figure out how to use this thing. Speaking of which, you might have noticed that the camera control button is actually covered. And that's because this is the new TAC Standard Case 4.0, which has a camera control slider built into the case, which means it's not exposed and cannot get damaged like other phone cases. Let me tell you a bit more about this. I've been really enjoying using the TAC standard case because it does provide a lot of functionality and practicality at the same time. What I mean is that this phone case is super thin, which makes it feel like you're just holding the phone without a case. And that feels very good in my hands because sometimes I find that the chunkiness of other phone cases to be pretty annoying and I just want to feel the phone as if it was caseless, but I still want to get protected, which is where this case comes in clutch. It feels almost caseless and bare to the hand, while also providing a lot of protection with this high-quality polycarbonate plastic. It even covers the whole camera, which is very useful. And like I say with the camera control button, all of the buttons here are very clicky and it gives you all the full functionality of the camera control button, just like the normal standard official Apple cases. It's also MagSafe compatible, but if you want to make sure it's even stickier to your MagSafe accessories, you can also add in a MagSafe ring just to make sure it's even more secure. Now the color I'm rocking here is the Arctic Frost color, which is almost transparent and basically allows you to see the color of the phone. Now if you do have a black phone or you just want to have a darker color, you can get the new Onyx Black colorway, which does give a more darker edge to your phone, which is pretty cool. This case is only 0.7mm thick and it only weighs about 13 to 15 grams depending on which model you get, which is just insane for a case while providing protection. You can get this case for the whole iPhone 16 series and you can check out the link in my description to find out more. Thank you once again to TAC for sponsoring this video. So I gave the iPhone 16 Pro a score of 86 out of 100. But does it deserve less or more? So let's take a look at my grading for each category again. So let's talk about the display on the iPhone 16 Pro. So I originally gave the display on the iPhone 16 Pro an A rating. And to be honest, I do think that I'll stick with that rating. It's an impressive display that ticks pretty much all the boxes that you need for a flagship display. And the only real gripe that I have with it is that it could be a little bit more brighter, since other competitors have like peak brightnesses of 3000 or 4000 nits, which the iPhone 16 Pro doesn't have. That is what's honestly stopping it from getting an A+ rating. But other than that, my standout points for the iPhone 16 Pro is its dynamic refresh rate, which always stays on point, and also its highly responsive screen. So that's it for the display. Let's take a look at the cameras. So I previously gave the iPhone 16 Pro's cameras an A grade, mainly because of its versatile 48MP main sensor with its 48MP ultra-wide and the 5x optical zoom. And to be honest, I am going to be keeping that A grade rating simply because I've been using this camera quite a lot and it's been very versatile for pretty much every situation I've been in so far. Now obviously it's not perfect and there are a few things that I wish it could do better, including portrait mode photos. But in terms of everyday photography, the camera system on here pretty much nails every photo, regardless of the environment, the lighting, or the different colors, which has been one of the best features of the 16 Pro. Obviously, it would be nice to have a dual periscope setup like the Oppo Find X8 Pro or the S24 Ultra, and I do wish that the portrait system was a bit more better, but honestly, there isn't too much I can complain about the system here. The shutter speed is lightning quick, and there's pretty much zero lag whenever I want to take a photo. I can always rely on this phone to get the photo whenever I need it. The biggest edge that I see the competitors have against the iPhone is definitely in the zoom, and also in low light. The iPhone 16 Pro is decent at both of these, but not great, which is why I can't give it more than an A at the maximum. But because of its video quality and its reliability, this is one of the best phones for taking photos in any moment. I still think that this phone deserves an A grade. Let's talk about the video though. In terms of video, I think that the iPhone 16 Pro is still the best for any type of mobile filmmaking, and that pretty much rules any other phone out there. In terms of stabilization, dynamic range, color, sharpness, I still think that the iPhone 16 Pro shoots the best video, including all the focal lengths from the ultra-wide, the wide, and the 5x optical zoom. Okay, now let's talk about the performance on the iPhone 16 Pro. So talking about the performance on the iPhone 16 Pro, I did say in my last video that it deserved an A+ or 100 out of 100, but honestly, there's a few things that have changed and I think it doesn't get that same grading anymore. Let's talk a bit more about it when we get home. So the performance on the iPhone 16 Pro has been pretty good for the most part. However, there have been just a few little lags and stutters here and there that have made me start to rethink my grading on the performance here. Now, obviously, no phone's ever going to be perfect, but the amount of lags and stutters that have been appearing have seemed to be a bit worrying. And although I still think this is still pretty top tier, I do think the grading should be lowered from an A+ to an A. So performance on here is still great, but not quite as good as I originally thought it was at the beginning. Now, when it comes to the software, there's quite a few things to talk about now that Apple Intelligence is pretty much available in most areas outside the United States. But to be honest, I still don't think it's very useful. Apart from a couple of times where I did need to use photo cleanup or maybe just do a bit of Apple Intelligence Siri, there hasn't been too many times where I feel like the usage has actually improved my quality of life. There are some writing tools available, but they're mostly only available on Apple's default apps and isn't usable on other applications like Google Docs. I also do find that Apple Intelligence Siri isn't that good either and often relies on ChatGPT for actual results. It only works really when you're doing stuff that is related to the iPhone, or if you're asking it basic questions or other stuff that is not the weather, it tends to go back to ChatGPT for help. But other than that, the software has been pretty good. It's basically an iPhone, iOS, it's all the same thing as usual. So I am sticking to that A grade as I had before. Now, the last thing that we have to talk about is the battery performance, but still currently 6:32 p.m. So I'll skip a few hours later and we'll talk about my battery performance. Okay, so now it's 10:57 and I want to talk about the battery performance now. So the battery performance on the iPhone 16 Pro has actually been a lot more impressive than I initially thought it was. In my initial day in the live video, I actually rated the battery life to be a B+, but after using the phone for about a month now, I can say that maybe you might get a better grade now. Today I had a pretty busy day. I had about 4 hours of screen on time and about an hour of that was actually video calling. And I still have 37% battery left, which is pretty impressive. So I must say that the battery life on the iPhone 16 Pro is actually a lot better than I actually thought it was. This has been the trend for the last month or so. I've been averaging about 3 to 4 hours of screen on time and still getting about 40 to 50% battery remaining every single day, which has been really impressive. Now, keep in mind, this is still considered to be a new phone, but even for that, this battery life is actually really good. And that is why I'm now regrading the battery life on the iPhone 16 Pro to an A grade instead of a B+. Now, let's wrap up my thoughts about the iPhone 16 Pro after using it for 1 month. And the final result is an 85 out of 100, which is an A grade. That is actually one less than what I initially graded it to be, so there hasn't been too much that has changed overall. But there are still 2 things that did change, which was the performance, which went down, and battery, which went up. So if you're an iPhone user and you're looking for something that's a little bit more compact, but fits all of those flagship tick boxes, then 16 Pro is pretty much your best bet. Alright, that wraps up this video. I'm Upwards, and I'll see you guys in the next video.